Begin with the sound of footsteps and the glint of glass. A narrow tube emerges from a small incision in a dog's cheek, curving toward a graduated cylinder where each droplet of saliva lands with the faintest click. The animal is calm, harnessed but not hurt, eyes moving toward the door before anything enters. In this room at the Institute of Experimental Medicine in St. Petersburg, a physiologist watches the cylinder's meniscus rise and fall, not with the appearance of food alone, but with the promise of it. The assistant's coat, the scrape of a dish, the rhythm of approaching steps, these signals send the saliva before the meat arrives. For a while they are annoyances, artifacts that complicate a study of digestion. Then the physiologist does what science demands when the world misbehaves in an interesting way. He pivots his attention from what he planned to study to what the preparation is teaching him. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov names the phenomenon a psychic secretion. He suspects it is not mystical at all. It is learning made visible in the mouth of a dog. Pavlov did not come to psychology by intention. He came from the hard school of physiology, a discipline that prized measurable processes and unromantic claims. He trained hands to do delicate surgery on small nerves and glands, and he built apparatus that could give the body a chance to tell the truth without theatrics. Digestion, to him, was a symphony of secretions and muscular waves. He wrote a great treatise on it and won the highest prize his profession could bestow. In 1904, the Nobel Committee called his name for discoveries about the physiology of digestion, a recognition earned not by a single clever experiment, but by a decade of exacting work. The irony is that this triumph provided the platform for a second life's work that would travel further than he could have guessed, into classrooms, clinics, advertising offices, and the quiet corners of ordinary fear. The dogs taught him by refusing to keep their saliva private. When the man who fed them entered, the glands awoke as if meat were already on the tongue. Pavlov recognized that the laboratory itself had become a teacher. The organisms in his care were discovering the structure of their small world and adjusting their bodies accordingly. If the opening of a door had, time and again, been followed by food, it made sense for the body to prepare at the cue. What had been a nuisance to a digestion researcher became the object of a new science, the systematic study of how neutral events become signals, how reflexes that once responded to a few natural triggers can be recruited to serve new meanings. He called the phenomenon the conditioned reflex. A bell or a tone, a signal with no inherent power to make saliva flow, could, if paired with meat powder enough times and with good timing, elicit the same response the food elicited by nature. In time, the signal alone would do. The animal's body had learned the world's grammar. There is a small but revealing point in translation. Pavlov's Russian term is closer to conditional than conditioned. The difference matters. He did not believe that the world stamps a permanent brand on an animal with a few pairings. He believed that the reflex becomes dependent on conditions, the way signals and outcomes are arranged in time and reliability. Change the conditions and the response fades. Remove the food and keep ringing and the saliva wanes. This fading has a name, extinction. Wait a day and ring again and a ghost of the response returns, spontaneous recovery. The body, it turns out, is conservative. It holds in reserve the possibility that the old rule might become true again. A signal is not a magic wand. It is a bet the organism makes about what the next moment will bring. Pavlov did not stop at the one trick of making a bell matter. He asked what counted as the same. Train the dog to salivate to a tone of a particular pitch, and it will also salivate, though less, to nearby pitches. Plot the response across a range, and you get a generalization gradient, a hill that peaks at the trained tone and slopes downward as you move away. Then teach the animal that one pitch predicts food and a slightly different one does not, and the slope sharpens into a narrow peak centered on the true signal. This is discrimination. In these gentle exercises, the laboratory reveals a law of life that works as well in a city as it does in a kennel. Organisms generalize to survive and discriminate to refine. They assume family resemblance until evidence forces them to be fussy. The mind of the dog, if you will permit the phrase, is not making poetry. It is making rules from regularities, and it writes those rules into glands and muscles. The schedule of the world matters. Ring and then feed. Ring and then feed. The order is everything. Reverse the order and the bell becomes a postscript, not a sign. If the tone reliably sits before the meat, the animal's stomach will begin its work early. If the tone comes after, nothing much is learned except that dinner has passed. Timing in these experiments is not a detail, it is the content. From this came a broader conviction that the nervous system is a predictor. It treats the present as a hint and commits the body to a future that is likely but not certain. The salivary gland is a simple witness to that commitment because it deposits its notes in a cylinder where a man with a pencil can count them. By building rooms that obeyed his need for order, Pavlov let these tiny laws become visible. He was obsessive about control, enough to construct a sound-insulated chamber. His colleagues called it the Tower of Silence, where the accidental cues of a bustling laboratory could not contaminate a trial. He trained assistants as carefully as he trained dogs. He kept his procedures spare. He waited as long as it took to see the rule emerge above the noise. Out of this devotion to order came an edifice of concepts that, though simple at the foundation, could be stacked into surprising heights. Second-order conditioning, in which a new neutral signal gains power by being paired with a signal that already predicts food. Conditioned inhibition, in which a cue can come to signal the absence of the expected outcome. Temporal conditioning, where mere passage of time with regular feedings can act like a clock. And the haunting phenomenon called experimental neurosis, where pushing an animal to discriminate between signals that are almost identical eventually produces agitation and disorganization, a picture eerily reminiscent of the collapse a person can undergo when life demands impossible distinctions too often. These are not tricks in a dog show. They are windows into how a nervous system makes itself useful in a changing world. Each droplet's appearance is a vote the body casts about what will happen next. The votes accumulate. The animal adjusts. In this we see a pattern that would travel beyond the lab. Phobias. Blossoming after an accident. Cravings awakened by a song that once played during a binge. A child's stomach roiling at the sight of the school that has become a site of humiliation. We also see the hope embedded in the same mechanism. Fears that fade when the signal is safely encountered without the dreaded blow. Cravings that can be quieted when the cue no longer summons the old reward. New meanings attached to old places when different outcomes are arranged with care. It is easy to tell the story as if a bell were the hero. Pavlov himself preferred a metronome. The specifics hardly matter. The point is that meaning adheres to events, not because of their essence, but because of their place in an order. A dog has no ancient pact with a bell. It has a nervous system that bets on patterns. We share that system. Much of what our bodies do in the background is a fabric woven from such bets. Saliva here, stomach acid there. A pulse quickening as footsteps mount the stairs outside your door, because last week those steps often meant an argument was coming. A life is not merely what happens to it. It is the contour of predictions a brain has learned to live by. Pavlov's style made him a legend and in some quarters a tyrant. He was a commanding presence, capable of generosity to his students and fury when procedures were sloppy. He valued loyalty to the work above comfort. He held to his schedule through political upheavals that would have finished a less stubborn man. After the revolution, the new rulers of Russia recognized that a scientist of his stature was both a jewel and a risk. Support came, sometimes grudgingly, and Pavlov, never shy about his contempt for political brutality, kept his laboratory alive. That laboratory, with its dogs and towers and ledgers, became a symbol of a certain kind of science, exacting, focused, inclined to distrust declarations that could not be translated into procedures another lab could perform. Across an ocean, a young American read Pavlov and felt the future taking shape. John B. Watson admired the refusal of introspective guesswork and the insistence on what could be seen, timed, verified. Where others saw dogs and drool and shrugged, Watson saw a template for a psychology that would finally deserve the name science. His manifesto would declare that the inner life, if it was to be spoken of at all, should be inferred from behavior and not anointed with authority by mere report. In this sense, Pavlov became the godfather of an American revolution he did not mean to start. He had not sought to banish consciousness. He had simply found a way to make learning visible without asking the learner for a poem. But once the method existed, it could be used to argue that poems were an indulgence science could not afford. The reach of conditioning extended beyond the laboratory faster than many expected. Therapists began to see in it a method for softening fears, not by preaching courage, but by arranging experience. If a person panics at the sight of a bridge, let them approach 100 bridges under conditions of safety until the old pairing of span and dune weakens and a new pairing of span and safety takes its place. Advertisers saw the same power from a different angle. Pair a product with images that already carry the flavor of desire or comfort, and some of that flavor will bleed into the item itself. A song becomes a sales tool, a color a craving. Critics lamented the manipulation. Others noted that the principle could be bent toward public health as easily as toward profit. The principle does not care. It is a description as how we attach meanings, not a prophecy of what we ought to want. There were limits that later generations would map. Not all associations are equally easy to form. A species comes into the world with certain predispositions that make some pairings seem natural and others perverse. A rat will readily learn to avoid a taste that preceded nausea, even if the illness arrives hours later, but it will learn far less readily to fear a light that preceded the same illness. The nervous system is not a blank tablet. It brings a history written in genes to the classroom of experience. Pavlov's method did not deny this. It offered a way to measure where plasticity yields to preparedness, where experience can bend us, and where it is fighting deeper habits. In this sense, conditioning is not an enemy of freedom. It is the substrate on which whatever freedom we manage is exercised, the way a sailor's skill is exercised on a sea with currents and prevailing winds. Pavlov himself never ceased to be a physiologist. His language, translated into the psychology we now speak, sometimes sounds quaint. He wrote of excitation and inhibition sweeping across the cortex like tides. He devised a typology of nervous systems that echoed the ancient humors, naming patterns of reactivity and balance that he thought made some beings choleric and others phlegmatic. We smile at these taxonomies now, but the ambition behind them, to connect the observable pattern of a life with lawful processes in the tissue of the brain, is the ambition that still drives laboratories that no longer measure saliva, but still measure time, still arrange signals and outcomes, still ask the body to teach them what it has learned. There is a picture of him in late life, mustached, severe, leaning a little as if to listen more intently to a point a student is making. He looks like a patriarch, and in a way he is, but his paternity is odd. He did not found a school of thought with slogans. He founded a method with consequences. That method taught the rest of us to be suspicious of explanations that cannot be trained into a preparation and made to speak in the only language the body truly speaks, the timing of its reactions. When the nervous system learns, the learning leaves a trace that can be read if one is patient and sparing in one's promises. Consider the subtler forms the reflex takes outside a kennel. The smell of disinfectant in a hospital can make a patient's stomach knot if, in the past, that smell has reliably preceded a painful procedure. A notification chime can flood the bloodstream with a sharp hope if it has long predicted attention from a person whose attention we crave. The corridor to a boss's office can raise a pulse, not because corridors are wicked, but because more than once, that walk has ended in a scolding. We want to explain these sensations in moral terms or in the language of character. Sometimes that is right. Often it is redundant. The body is doing what bodies do, preparing for what is likely on the basis of what has been. To change the feeling, change the contingencies. Walk the corridor toward praise often enough, and the corridor will stop feeling like a tunnel to judgment. Hear the chime in contexts where it means nothing much, and the craving it summons will fade. Extinction is not erasure. It is new learning layered on top of the old. That is why a fear can return when the context changes. Why a craving can return in the town where one used to drink even after months of abstinence elsewhere. The older map is still in the drawer, The new map must be consulted deliberately until it becomes the default. Therapists know this and plan for renewal. They teach not hope alone, but vigilance. Not slogans about conquering fear, but habits that make safe naps familiar across the varied rooms of a life. Some critics accused Pavlov of mechanizing the mind, of reducing rich experience to dribbles and dials. The charge misses a distinction he never forgot. To say that a reflex can be trained is not to say that a person is only a reflex. To say that a signal acquires meaning through contingency is not to deny that some meanings arrive by other routes, through language and culture, and the deliberate adoption of values. Pavlov's work at its best humbles a certain kind of arrogance. It reminds the orator that the body keeps its own counsel and that much of what we are rides on habits acquired without ceremony. It also arms the reformer with a set of levers. If a city wishes to change the habits of its citizens, let it change the patterns of cue and consequence that greet them when they choose the bus over the car, the book over the slot machine, the neighbor over the screen. The rest is speeches. Late in life, Pavlov returned, as old scientists do, to first principles. Why can a reflex be conditioned at all? The answer he had offered for years, because the nervous system is an organ of prediction, now seemed too abstract. He wanted to see the process in tissue. He could not. The tools were not ready. He settled for a vision in which excitation flowed along paths, eased by use and met by gates of inhibition, where the world had taught the animal to pause. Decades later, others would watch synapses strengthen with paired firing and see molecules traffic to spines that had been busy. They would find a cellular mirror for the law he had read in saliva. It is a mark of his method's integrity that later microscopes confirm the curves his cylinders drew. There is a different temptation to resist as well, the love of a single lever. Conditioning became so powerful a story that some readers wanted it to be the whole book. They were tired of mysteries. The bell and the dog seemed to promise an end to vagueness. Pavlov himself never made that promise. He narrowed his claims to the domain his instruments could oversee and left the rest to those with different tools. In this, he models a humility that the sciences of mind have to relearn in every generation. Measure what you can. Do not despise what you cannot measure yet. Do not meddle your measures with your metaphysics. Build bridges where methods overlap. When he died in 1936, the dogs still salivated on cue, and young scientists still arrived in Leningrad to watch the craft up close. Outside, the world was preparing for more violence, and psychologists elsewhere were preparing new traditions that would celebrate cognition and information and the structure of language. The bell did not stop ringing. It simply joined an orchestra in which other instruments took turns carrying the melody. In clinics, the old pairing and unpairing of cues would be rearranged to soften panic and loosen compulsions. In classrooms, schedules of reinforcement would be tuned to foster skill. In laboratories, conditioning would become a basic phenomenon from which to derive models of attention, timing, and prediction error. In daily life, we would continue to learn associations without asking permission from our ideals. Return to the room where we began. The assistant enters. The dog's jaw wets. The cylinder climbs by 0.5 milliliter. A score is marked. It is a small event until you remember that it encodes a history. The animal's body is rehearsing its past to prepare for its near future. We do the same. Pavlov showed us a way to see it without asking the animal to confess. He did not invent learning. He found a way to listen to it. When you strip away the romance and the resentment that always follow famous work, that is what remains. A method that lets the next student in the next room check whether the world still agrees. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see. There is one more lens through which to hold Pavlov's conditioned reflex. The work travels because it offers a handle that can be grasped even when fashions change. What persists is the discipline to make a claim small enough to test and large enough to matter, and the humility to let the result revise one's pride. Each demonstration becomes a lesson in method as much as in theory. Arrange the world with care, invite a response, record without flinching, and then ask what part of the picture the finding truly covers. The rest is the patience to repeat this without romance until a shape appears that others can also see.
Midnight silver moon, dusty boots on a winding road. A shadow's the only friend I've known since she packed up and let me go. Empty whiskey bottle on the seat, her laugh still echoes in my bones. Saddle's heavy with memories. I ride alone where the wind still blows. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Sunrise paints the horizon gold, but it don't warm a lonesome soul. Every town I pass feels half her size. Every trail's haunted by goodbye. I whisper prayers to open skies, hoping someday my heart'll find a brand new path beyond the pain, where broken hearts can heal in time. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be, nowhere else to be. Nowhere else to be. No